This property falls under HOA jurisdiction. We're only conducting an inspection. An inspection? I never approved this. It's within our authority. This is insane. I had only left my house for what should have been a quick 30-minute trip to the hardware store. A few bags of mulch for the flower beds. Replacement screws for the trellis I'd been repairing in the backyard all week. Nothing important. I didn't pack anything. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. I even left the side gate unlocked because a gravel delivery was supposed to arrive later that afternoon. One tiny decision. The kind nobody ever thinks twice about. The Texas heat shimmered above the pavement as I backed out of the driveway. I remember noticing how strangely quiet the neighborhood felt that day. Almost unnaturally quiet. But I brushed the feeling aside and kept driving. When I returned, my instincts reacted before my mind did. Something was wrong with the front door. It wasn't standing wide open. There weren't signs of forced entry. It was just off, slightly cracked open like someone had carefully left it that way on purpose. I stayed sitting in my truck longer than I should have, staring at my own house like it belonged to somebody else. Then movement passed behind the front window, a shadow moving slowly and confidently through my living room. My first thought wasn't HOA. It was burglary. My second thought was my dog. I heard barking inside, loud, aggressive, territorial. Before I even stepped onto the driveway, I was already dialing 911. I stood there waiting with my pulse hammering in my chest, gripping my keys so tightly the edges bit into my hand. When a patrol car finally rolled up, the relief hit me so suddenly I nearly laughed out loud. Officer Davis approached the front entrance cautiously, one hand hovering close to his holster. I watched him disappear through the doorway. Seconds later, I heard voices inside. Not screams, not panic, arguing. Then, about a minute later, the officer stepped back outside wearing the strangest expression I'd ever seen on a cop. "You're going to want to see this," he told me. Inside my living room stood two strangers I'd never laid eyes on before. Middle-aged, plain clothes, bright green safety vests with large white lettering across the front. One of them carried a clipboard. The other held a tablet in both hands. They stood there completely relaxed, like they had every right in the world to be inside my house. I snapped, "What the hell are you doing in my home?" The woman barely reacted. "We're responding to a resident complaint." I let out one sharp laugh of disbelief. "You're trespassing. I'm not even part of your HOA." The two of them exchanged an irritated glance, like I was the one creating problems. "All homes on the street fall under Cedar Ridge Authority," the man replied smoothly. That's when Officer Davis stepped between us. "They do not," I said firmly, "and I have the deed to prove it." That was the exact moment their confidence faltered. The officers escorted them outside, but before the woman left, she paused on the porch, smiled at me calmly, and said, "You'll be hearing from the board." I locked the door the second they walked away. At the time, I didn't realize that smile was a warning. The next morning, the threat arrived. An envelope had been taped directly to the center of my front door. Bright orange, the kind of color designed to grab your attention instantly. The same shade used on hazard warnings and construction notices. Before I even opened it, my stomach tightened. Whatever was inside wasn't going to be good. Across the top, printed in large, unforgiving letters, was the word violation. I opened it right there on the porch. They hadn't cited one issue. They cited everything. Apparently, my grass was suddenly too tall. The greenhouse I built myself years ago was now labeled an unauthorized structure. Even my trash cans had become violations because they were supposedly visible from the street outside approved hours. Every single item carried a fine. Every fine renewed daily. Every line ended with a deadline. This wasn't enforcement anymore. It was retaliation. After illegally entering my house, they were trying to reverse the situation and paint me as the offender. I stood there longer than I realized, the paper shaking slightly in my hands. Not because I was scared, because I was angry. The cold, controlled kind of anger that settles in when somebody thinks they can bully you. That was when Robert walked over. He crossed the street slowly with his shoulders hunched, constantly glancing around the neighborhood like he didn't want anyone noticing us talking. Robert had lived in the area longer than almost anyone. long enough to recognize trouble before it fully arrived. They always do this first, he muttered quietly while eyeing the orange notice. Corner houses, properties outside their reach, people they think won't push back. He explained that Cedar Ridge HOA had spent years pushing a ridiculous theory that if enough HOA residents voted in favor of expansion, they could absorb nearby properties retroactively. No signatures, no deed transfers, no legal agreements, just intimidation and paperwork. It wasn't lawful. It wasn't legitimate. But according to Robert, it usually worked because most homeowners eventually got exhausted and gave in. I didn't. Over the next several days, the letters kept coming. The envelopes piled across my kitchen counter, like evidence in an ongoing crime scene. Every notice sounded more aggressive than the last. They used phrases like annexation authority, implied consent, and forfeited objection periods. The language wasn't meant to make sense. It was meant to intimidate. The strategy was obvious. Wear me down until fighting back felt impossible. That was when I contacted Sarah Evans. Sarah specialized in property law. More importantly, she specialized in fighting abusive HOAs. When I explained everything to Sarah, she didn't look shocked at all, not even slightly. They depend on pressure, she said calmly. Confusion, fear, endless paperwork. If you hesitate for even a second, they take that as a win. She moved immediately. Cease and desist letters were drafted the same afternoon. Formal legal notices followed. Every instance of trespassing, harassment, and intimidation was documented carefully. Clear legal boundaries drawn so boldly they couldn't pretend not to understand them. Cedar Ridge responded 3 days later. A landscaping crew arrived without warning. No phone call, no notice, no permission. Just several men in work boots wandering across my property trimming bushes that didn't need trimming, while another worker tore apart one of the rose beds I had planted with my own hands years earlier. That was the moment everything finally became clear. This had never really been about regulations. It was about wearing me down piece by piece until surrender felt easier than resistance. That same evening, I installed cameras everywhere. High definition, motion activated. Front yard, backyard, side yard, driveway, every possible angle covered. If they crossed the line again, they wouldn't just leave behind damage. They'd leave evidence. And I was finished letting them operate unseen. When the restraining order was finally approved, I made the mistake of believing the worst part was over. For the first time in over a week, I slept longer than 4 hours. No violation notices taped to my door. No slow-moving trucks creeping past my house. No footsteps near the fence at midnight. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels earned after constant chaos. It lasted exactly 48 hours. The next escalation started small. Small enough that someone else might have ignored it. A neighborhood newsletter appeared in my mailbox. Glossy paper. Full color. Folded neatly like it belonged there. The headline never mentioned my name directly. It didn't have to. When one home threatens the entire community, the article talked about certain residents refusing to cooperate with neighborhood standards, unsafe property conditions, hazardous structures, potential chemical dangers. It claimed maintaining community harmony sometimes required firm action. Halfway through reading it, I already understood what they were doing. They had stopped arguing about legality. Now, they were trying to control perception. That afternoon, Robert sent me a text message with only one sentence. They're talking about you online. I opened the Cedar Ridge residents' Facebook page. It was public, even to non-members. The post had exploded. Hundreds of comments. Screenshots of my house. Zoomed-in photos of my greenhouse. Even still frames taken from a video, recording of me yelling at the landscaping crew days earlier. They froze the image perfectly. Mouth open, eyes intense, mid-shout, completely out of context, completely intentional. Late that night, Brenda Kensington commented personally, "Our HOA exists to protect shared safety and community values. When one resident refuses cooperation, the entire neighborhood suffers." She signed it with her full name and official HOA title, like some kind of public statement. That was when Sarah said something I never forgot. "They're manufacturing consent," she explained. Once enough people believe you're the problem, anything they do afterward feels justified. That night, sleep became impossible. I sat alone in my office with the lights turned off, watching my security feeds glow across the monitor. Front yard, driveway, backyard, side gate. At exactly 1:17 a.m., movement flickered across the backyard camera. Not wind, not an animal. Seconds later, I heard a faint mechanical buzzing sound. A drone hovered just above my fence line. Slow, steady, watching. The camera mounted beneath it tilted downward like an eye studying prey. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broom, and sprinted barefoot into the yard, waving it uselessly toward the machine. The drone rose higher immediately, drifting backward before disappearing into the darkness. It returned the next night, and the night after that. Sarah filed privacy complaints, FAA reports, police documentation. Everything moved slowly. Cedar Ridge didn't. The real escalation happened on a Tuesday night. I was working late in my office with headphones on, completely focused on code, when my phone vibrated with a motion alert. Backyard camera. I opened the live feed expecting to see a delivery truck, or maybe a raccoon near the trash bins. Instead, I saw two men inside my fence yard. Both wore Cedar Ridge HOA polo shirts. One of them was digging through my stacked firewood. The other walked directly toward my storage shed. Bolt cutters gleamed in his hand beneath the motion light. I didn't stop to think. I ran outside barefoot, heart pounding so hard it hurt, shouting at them with a voice cracked by pure anger. Neither man looked remotely nervous. One calmly raised a laminated document, like it was a police badge. Routine HOA safety inspection. I shouted about the restraining order. They claimed it didn't apply. Mrs. Kensington told us otherwise. That sentence was all I needed to hear. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. By then, the two men had disappeared. But they left something behind. A clipboard. My name had been circled aggressively in red marker. Underneath it, someone had written a single word. Problem. The deputy never smiled, never joked. She watched the security footage twice in complete silence. Then she looked at me and said quietly, "This isn't enforcement anymore. This is targeted harassment." After that, the criminal charges came quickly. Trespassing, property damage, violation of court orders, and eventually court itself. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Brenda sat across from me looking polished and perfectly composed, whispering calmly to her attorneys like this was just another routine meeting. Like she hadn't spent weeks terrorizing someone who wasn't even part of her organization. The judge didn't seem impressed. "This is not an HOA disagreement," he said firmly. "This is a pattern." For the first time since everything started, I felt the balance begin to shift. Not relief, not victory. Something else. Control, slipping away from people who never should have had it in the first place. Because this had never been about lawns, or trash bins, or rules. It was about power, and they pushed too far.